All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to dig into some fascinating stuff.
Well, today we're hopping across the pond to Paris,
Oh,
actually.
Paris. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah. We've got this Fox News article about a recent meeting between President-elect Trump and Prince William.
Hmm. That's quite a pairing. Lots to unpack there, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and it's got, well, royal health updates, some Parisian encounters, and even a bit of what some might call, well, diplomatic charm, let's say.
Diplomatic charm. I like that. Sounds like we've got a good mix of personal moments and maybe some political implications, too.
Definitely. So this all takes place during the reopening ceremony of Notre Dame Cathedral.
Ah, Notre Dame. That's quite a symbolic event, wouldn't you say, after the fire and everything?
Oh, absolutely. A symbol of resilience. And the article mentions that, well, French President Macron was there, Ukrainian President Zelensky, Jill Biden representing the U.S.
Wow. Quite the gathering of world leaders.
Yeah, yeah. But amidst all of that, Trump and William, they found time for a private chat at the UK ambassador's residence.
A one-on-one. That does suggest they wanted to go beyond just the usual, quick hello at a big event.
Right. And Trump said, quote, "I had a great talk with the prince."
Of course, we always have to take those kinds of statements with a grain of salt.
Oh, for sure. But it does suggest, at least on the surface, a certain level of, well, cordiality.
Cordiality, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's particularly interesting given their past interactions.
Oh, you're right. This was their first meeting since Trump's recent election win.
Exactly. And, well, their history hasn't always been the smoothest.
No, not always. Remember
Oh,
that state visit back in 2019? Let's just say there were a few awkward moments.
a few, I remember. So to see a more, uh, dare I say, friendly tone now, it makes you wonder what's changed.
Exactly. And speaking of changes, this meeting also gives us some insights into the royal family itself. The article mentions Trump asked about Kate Middleton's well-being.
Oh, right. There's been some public concern about her health lately.
Yeah, exactly. Her recent health challenges have been, pretty widely reported.
So any updates are going to be closely watched, for sure.
And according to Trump, William said Kate's, quote, doing well.
Well, that's good to hear, of course. Assuming, we're taking this secondhand account with a grain of salt.
Right, right. But still, it's a little peek into the human side of these figures who often seem, I don't know, larger than life.
I agree. It reminds us that behind the titles and the public appearances, they're dealing with real-life stuff just like the rest of us.
Exactly. And speaking of personal matters, the article says Trump and William also talked about King Charles's health.
Oh, that's right. There have been concerns about his health, too, especially with him now being the monarch and all.
Right, lots of responsibility on his shoulders. So any news about how he's doing is, well, it's going to attract attention.
For sure, both in the UK and internationally.
Yeah, and according to Trump, William said, quote, his father is fighting very hard, and he loves his father.
That's quite a statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really humanizes King Charles. Makes you remember that beyond the crown, he's a dad facing some tough stuff.
Definitely. It adds a whole other layer to this meeting, moves it beyond just the diplomacy and into something more personal.
Exactly, that personal connection.
Yeah.
And maybe even gives us a glimpse into national sentiment, too.
Right, like how the nation feels about their king's health.
It adds a whole other dimension to things.
And speaking of personal touches, you're not going to believe this, but Trump also commented on Prince William's new beard.
Oh, a beard. What did he say?
He said, and I quote, "He's a good-looking guy. He looked really very handsome last night. Some people look better in person. He looked great. He looked really nice, and I told him that."
Well, that's certainly a detail you don't hear every day in diplomatic circles.
Right. It makes you wonder, like, what's the point of including that? But then you think, well, diplomacy is about relationships, too.
Exactly. It's not just about policy and agreements. It's also about personal impressions.
And sometimes a simple compliment can go a long way.
It can definitely set a tone, even if it's about something as, well, seemingly superficial as a beard.
Right. But it shows that even in these high-stakes meetings, human interaction, those personal impressions still matter.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, what other little signals might we be missing? What seems insignificant might actually reveal a lot about the dynamics at play.
That's a great point. So we've got this seemingly friendly meeting, the backdrop of Notre Dame, health updates that give us a peek into the human side of royalty, and then these little details like the beard comment that might actually be more significant than they appear.
It's a fascinating mix of personal and political, that's for sure. And it raises the question, how might all these seemingly separate things come together to influence the future of U.S.-UK relations?
And that's a key point. We're not just talking about a meeting between two individuals. We're talking about two nations, each with their own history and interests.
Exactly. And as we move forward, it's important to remember that these personal interactions, even the small ones, can have ripple effects on the bigger geopolitical stage.
That's such a good point. So we've set the scene, explored the personal side, and started to think about the bigger implications. But there's another layer we need to look at, the relationship between Trump and King Charles.
Their past interactions have been, well, pretty interesting, haven't they?
Oh, they really have. Remember that meeting back in 2019 during Trump's state visit to the UK?
Yeah, I remember that.
Clarence House, they put out a statement at the time talking about a good working relationship.
Right. Right.
But we know that meeting, well, it went beyond just, the typical diplomatic stuff, especially when it came to climate change.
Absolutely. There were reports they talked about environmental issues way longer than planned.
Yeah, much longer. And Trump even praised Charles's passion afterwards.
He did. He did. He said, and I'm quoting here, he is really into climate change. And I think that's great. What he really wants and what he really feels warmly about is the future. He wants to make sure future generations have climate that is good climate, as opposed to a disaster. And I agree.
Wow, that's quite a statement from Trump, right? Knowing how vocal Charles has been about environmental stuff.
Yeah, and now he's king, so his words carry even more weight.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how his relationship with Trump and that willingness to talk about climate change, how that might affect things down the line.
It definitely raises some questions about future collaborations, doesn't it?
It does. And then there's the fact that King Charles, he reached out to Trump after that assassination attempt earlier this year.
Oh, right. That was a gesture. Well, it kind of went beyond just politics, didn't it?
It did. It suggests, well, at least some level of personal concern.
Definitely. Like maybe a foundation of respect, even if they don't agree on everything.
It does make you think about how these personal connections, how they might play out on the bigger political stage, especially with someone like Charles who's, well, he's not afraid to speak his mind.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting dynamic. Like, how much do personal relationships between leaders actually influence international relations?
Right. We usually focus on, the policies, the treaties, that sort of thing.
But those personal connections, they could be just as important, maybe even more so sometimes.
I think you're right. It's like we're getting this, this behind-the-scenes look at how diplomacy really works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's not always about official statements and carefully crafted images.
Right. It shows those personal interactions, they still matter, even in this world of, instant communication and everything.
They do. They really do. And it makes you realize how complex global leadership is.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about, representing your country's interests.
It's about navigating all these relationships, understanding the people, the individuals behind the titles.
So true. And I think this meeting with William and then considering Charles becoming king and his relationship with Trump, it all gives us a really valuable look at how these personal connections can shape things globally.
It does. It reminds us that understanding the human element, the personal dynamics, it's just as crucial as understanding the politics if we want to really grasp how international relations work.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So with this Fox News article, we're doing more than just, recounting a meeting. We're looking at history, relationships, and how those might affect the future.
Exactly. That's what makes these deep dives so interesting. We're not just scratching the surface.
We're getting into the details, making connections, and figuring out the why behind the what.
Absolutely. And speaking of details, let's go back to something we talked about earlier, Kate Middleton's health.
Oh, right. The article said William told Trump she's doing well.
Which is good news, of course. But it also, well, it highlights how much scrutiny the royals are under, especially when it comes to their health.
It's a tough balance, isn't it? The public's naturally curious about these figures.
They are, but they also deserve privacy, and we should avoid speculating too much.
Yeah, for sure. It's important to remember that while they're human beings, even with all the privilege and the attention, they still face personal challenges.
Right, they do. And they deserve our empathy and respect.
I agree. And that pressure, it's not just on Kate, it's on the whole royal family.
Exactly. Remember all the concern about King Charles's health?
Oh, yeah. It was clear that, how he was doing, it was a big deal for the whole nation.
And it makes sense. The monarch's health, it's tied to the stability of the institution.
It's not just a personal matter, it affects the whole country. Which brings us back to Charles's relationship with Trump.
Right, because we know Charles has strong opinions about climate change,
Mhm.
and he's not afraid to talk to world leaders about it.
Exactly. So, how might this personal connection with Trump affect things? Will they work together more on climate change?
It's hard to say for sure. But Charles's position as monarch, it might limit what he can actually do policy-wise.
Right, but his voice still matters. He can influence people, especially other leaders.
Absolutely. His personal relationships, they could be a big factor in how the world responds to climate change.
It's like we're seeing a new kind of royal diplomacy, Maybe different from how things were done before.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Charles using his platform and his personal connections to, well, to try and make a difference.
It's exciting, right? To think a monarch could actually drive real change on a global scale.
It definitely is.
Ugh.
And it makes you realize this meeting between Trump and William, it might seem like it was just about, personal stuff.
But it could be part of something much bigger.
Exactly. Something that involves global leadership, personal beliefs, and the future of how countries interact with each other.
It really shows you how connected everything is. What happens in one place, it can affect the whole world.
It really does highlight how interconnected things are. And these deep dives, well, they help us see those connections. The personal, the political, the global, it's all woven together.
And that's what I find so interesting about this particular deep dive. We've got these personal moments, these health updates, these glimpses into the lives of people who often seem so, I don't know, untouchable.
They do. They seem that way, don't they? But then we see how those personal things, they intersect with the bigger picture, the politics and the global stuff.
Exactly. It reminds us that world events, they're not just headlines, they're shaped by people, by relationships.
Absolutely. And understanding those individual dynamics, well, it can help us make sense of the bigger forces at play.
So we've explored the meeting, the health updates, the personal side of it all. But as we wrap up, the question I keep coming back to is, what does it all mean for the future?
Ah, the big question, right? And I think, honestly, it's too early to say for sure. We've seen some signs of warmth, of shared concerns, a willingness to engage on tough issues like climate change.
Right, but how those interactions will actually translate into action, into policy, that remains to be seen.
It does. It's like we're at this crossroads, watching these relationships develop and wondering, well, which path will they take?
Exactly. Will Charles's passion for the environment lead to more global cooperation? Will Trump's seemingly friendly interactions with William and Charles lead to, a better relationship between the U.S. and the U.K.?
It's fascinating to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
And while we don't have all the answers right now, well, these deep dives, they give us the context, the background. We need to make some educated guesses, I suppose.
To understand the nuances, to maybe even anticipate what might happen next.
Precisely. And that's what I love about these deep dives. We're not just passively listening to information.
We're actively thinking about it, connecting the dots.
Exactly, drawing our own conclusions. And that's the beauty of it. These deep dives, they're not about giving you the answers.
They're about making you think critically, about exploring, and ultimately coming to a deeper understanding of the world.
Well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into royal encounters, health updates, and all the diplomatic twists and turns, I'm left feeling, well, cautiously optimistic. We've seen hints of collaboration, shared concerns, the potential for a more connected, maybe even a more harmonious world.
I agree. There's potential there.
But it's up to all of us to stay informed, to keep asking questions, and to see how these initial interactions play out on the global stage.
Well said. And to our listeners, I'd say, don't just take the headlines at face value. Dig deeper, explore the details, and remember the human element in all of this. You might be surprised what you find.
Absolutely. So to all our fellow deep divers out there, thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting the dots. You never know what fascinating insights you might uncover.
Until next time, happy diving.